Thank you for joining me today for morning devotion. We are going to start off where we left off last week in talking about the 10 lepers. I'm going to begin by reading Luke 17, starting at verse 11. Now it happened as he went to Jerusalem that Jesus passed through the midst of Samaria and Galilee. Then as he entered a certain village, there met him 10 men who were lepers, who stood afar off. And we talked about this last week, how they were social distancing themselves from Jesus because of their leprosy. And we compared it to how we are distanced from God because of our sin, and how Jesus reconciled us to God by his death on the cross. Then continuing on with the rest of the story, in verse 13, they lifted up their voices and said, Jesus, Master, have mercy on us. And the phrase lifted up their voices indicates that they weren't whispering. They were loud about crying out to him for help. They were humiliated because of their disease and dealing with the loss of respect, the loneliness and the homesickness for home and their family and their children. They were broke and unable to work and probably pretty scared because of the uncertainty of their future. And just that the effort that they took to get close enough to Jesus, there might have been even people who tried to discourage them from doing that, but they made the 10 of them together, rallied together, and made their way to Jesus because he really was their only hope for getting healed and to get back to their family. So in the next verse, in verse 14, Jesus says to them, go show yourself to the priest. And so it was that as they went, they were cleansed. They were very familiar with their Jewish history. They knew that guidelines that God had given Moses in Deuteronomy regarding skin issues, and that they were not going to be able to go home unless the priest gave them a clean bill of health. But they definitely did not waste any time, and they obeyed what Jesus told them to do. They knew enough about him that whatever Jesus said, they were to do it. And so in verse 15, one of them, when he saw that he was healed, returned and with a loud voice glorified God and fell down on his face at Jesus' feet, giving him thanks. And then it says, and he was a Samaritan. I often wondered, because Jesus in the next verse says, so Jesus said, where were there not 10 cleansed, but where are the other 9? And I often think to myself, why didn't the other 9 return? Didn't they see their friend turn around and make his way back to Jesus? Did they try to talk him out of going back? Did they send a message with him, hey, tell Jesus blah 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 blah? Or were they totally oblivious to his absence because they were in such a hurry to get back to their life? Surely they were thankful. I can't imagine that they weren't thankful. Sometimes I feel like we're more like the 9, though. We don't always say thanks, and we are thankful. I don't know. They could have maybe thought that they deserved it, or they took the healing for granted. Or they maybe thought to themselves, Jesus knows I'm thankful. He doesn't need me to tell him. Maybe it didn't even cross their mind because they were just so overjoyed and just wanted to get back to the realities of living a life with their family. Who really knows for sure? But all we know is this great example of thankfulness because of the Samaritan man who made his way back to Jesus instead of going straight home and falling at his feet and giving him thanks. He was the most unlikely too, because the Bible makes a point to say he was a Samaritan. And then he says it again, were there not any found who returned to give glory to God except this foreigner? So Jesus refers to him as a Samaritan and then as a foreigner. And, the Samaritans were not particularly accepted by the Jews. And here is this man who is unloved and unaccepted by the Jewish people of the day. he had experienced the true love and healing grace of Jesus, and he turned around and worshiped him. And how often do we feel unaccepted and loved by people around us, and Jesus opens his arms, and we experience a love, unmerited love of God, and we're able to just fall at his feet and worship him. And when Jesus saw that, he said, "Rise and go, your faith has made you well." So sometimes I see ourselves as being more like the 9, as I mentioned, instead of the 1. And it takes quite a bit of effort, just to say, hey, wait, I need to give thanks. Even in the middle of trials, there's always something to be thankful for. And it really does break the woe is me attitude and the depression that you feel during those times and the uncertainty, to just start thinking about God's faithfulness and all that he's done in the past, and just to give him thanks. There's an old hymn that we used to sing. It's called "Count Your Blessings, Name Them One by One." I don't know if any of you even remember that hymn. It was not like as popular as "How Great Thou Art" or "Amazing Grace," but it just says, "When upon life's billows you are tempest tossed." And then the chorus breaks into, "Count your blessings, name them one by one. Count your many blessings, see what God has done." Thankfulness for this Samaritan, it caused him to have an about-face moment, and he returned back to Jesus. Being thankful can turn a dismal day around into a bright, thankful day with Jesus. Let's try to be more like the 1 instead of the 9. Do you agree? Have a great day, everybody.